I need a dollar, 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 that's what I need. Hey, hey, well I need a dollar, 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 that's what I need. Hey, hey, said I need a dollar, 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 that's what I need. And if I share with you my story, would you share your dollar with me? Bad times are coming and I reap what I done sown. Hey, hey, well let me tell you something, all that glitters ain't gold.
Anti-social workers and case manglers call me crazy, lazy, dumb, and a bum. Because my knowledge don't come from the institution. Anthropology, ethnography, psychology. The study about us, without us. So how can we abolish PoLice when your racist, classist neighbors don't think twice about calling, hating, sweeping, baiting us houseless mamas, workers, survivors, when we are sitting, standing, or just waiting? Abolish PoLice when middle-class people hide behind the myth of nice? To go back to overstand and unpack the cult of the Karens, we must overstand the cult of the Carings. Anti-social workers began in business with the PoLice in prisons long time before any of us were here, just like they are now. So for abolition to be a solution, it can't cause more poor people's oppression. For abolition to be a solution, it must free up the white people lies about the absence of us from your middle class eyes. For abolition to be a solution, we must not look to institutions that separate, predate, and destroy poor families all the time. For abolition to be a solution, it must be a poor people informed revolution, filled with sideways, indigenous life ways, prayer, poetry, and all kinds of surviving, thriving, and liberating without more othering, silencing, charity, and savioring. Yeah, today's podcast from a poverty scholar is dedicated to poverty, disability, and military scholar James Kraft, who wasn't killed by PoLice 2 weeks ago. Yes, I did say who wasn't killed by PoLice 2 weeks ago in occupied Yalamu, Frisco, and all those warriors against PoLice terror, who might not understand or overstand that the social work industrial complex has acted in tandem and on their own to predate, separate, and criminalize poor and houseless families. Poor black and brown and indigenous elders and black and brown indigenous and poor white youth. And that poor people's theory is a necessary part of uncolonizing our minds from the lie of PoLice safety. As many in the Bay Area know, an elder black disabled war veteran and resident of San Francisco, James Kraft, was surrounded by over 35 PoLice officers with military weaponry and guns, and pinned on a street corner for over 8 hours over 2 weeks ago, following a Karen, aka gentrifucker, PoLice call claiming Mr. Kraft was holding a weapon and looked menacing, which we all know are classic code words for being black, disabled, and poor in Americland. The weapon was a small metal pipe which he held whenever he was outside, by accounts of other long-term neighbors who knew him. The menacing was him having a mental health crisis, or just being him. There were 2 DPH, that's Department of Public Health workers, called in, and neither of them did anything. except stand by the cops, said Jeremy Miller, Poor Magazine poverty scholar, Idris Deli Foundation, and co-founder of Cop Watch San Francisco, to PoPeople's Radio last week. In the end, Mr. Kraft was not killed, mostly because of trained cop watchers and poverty scholars like Jeremy, as well as over 100 witnesses who were also present due to a Black Lives Matter protest rerouting their march to the area. So this is a success of sorts. But how about a complete change of that scenario? No $1 million PoLice, no useless DPH workers, and no Karen calls in the first place. So to begin with the end of the culture of the Karens, again we must go back to the origins of the Carings, a.k.a. the Caring Industrial Complex, known as the settlement houses, which were the original iterations of group homes, closed basements, shelters, and jails. These early antisocial workers were in business with the PoLice, just like they are now, getting referrals for criminals, which were there, always poor, disabled people, oftentimes immigrants or indigenous people that they had already forced off their lands and were now setting up with free and easy access to the man's poison, a.k.a. alcohol, so the early day sheriffs and KKK cops could arrest them for the very thing that set up them. Then the ugly laws were introduced, making it illegal to be unsightly, disabled, and begging in public. The antisocial workers were the ones benefiting, the ones urging the PoLice to pick up their future clients and bring them to those settlement houses. These evil roots progressed in the roots of the Roosevelt-era launched New Deal, created for white widows of war veterans, a.k.a. the deserving poor. Not us poor people like myself and my mama. Something the welfare queens, that's small W capital Q, uncovered in 2006. Something that's very similar today. Something that makes us poor parents be criminal for the sole act of being poor, a person of color, disabled, claiming our lives and our choices are automatically suspect, criminal. And then there is the way the so-called public views our houseless, poor, disabled bodies. I intentionally left POC, people of color, out of that last list because, like my sister Junebug says, poverty is a culture. Like Audre Lorde says, class matters. And like I say, poverty is real. So yeah, our loudness, our children, our lifestyles, our hoopties, our stresses, and our struggles are often incomprehensible to middle and land-stealing classes. We are often seen as annoying, a bother, messy, dirty, crazy, violent, when all we are is convening. And on houseless folks, it's a whole nother level. As houseless people, we don't even have what I call the privilege of privacy and struggle with the violence of exposure. So all of our belongings and lives are on display for people to judge, hate, sweep, and profile on the daily. And in the case of disabled peoples, again, our ways of just being are automatically seen or unseen as strange, scary, or other. And when you bring the ways that houselessness, disability, and culture intersect with deep, racist Americlan violence, our lives are absolutely in danger. Witness Luis Dimitri Gongara Pat, Stephen Tyler, both houseless, both disabled, both of color, both in the public, ending in their PoLice murder. Poverty scholarship and People School are urgently needed in all the non-PoLice trainings and settings Yeah, we're dealing with a time when the people be talking about abolishing the PoLice, but let me take you through a scenario. If a person is having a mental health crisis due to all kinds of reasons, us poor and houseless and disabled people have breakdowns, a scam lord threat, an eviction notice, a fight with someone we love, a domestic violence situation, a sweep, aka removal of our belongings while we are living on these stolen streets, just to name a few. Or even more dangerous for families, a social worker's referral to CPS, APS, and court systems. Or even a community person who is maybe trained in de-escalation, but as my Mama D said, never missed a meal. Those interactions might end in our death, our incarceration, our family separation, even if they aren't rolling with the PoLice. Maybe it's just in our institutionalization. It is why I say the cult of the caring, not just the cult of the Karens, must be addressed before we can talk about no PoLice. And sometimes there is nothing you can do. Period. This is what I call the cult of rehabilitation. Sometimes no matter how messy, how escalated, how angry we are, we just need to be left alone. Just like people inside. Just like some of y'all hearing my voice right now. We don't need an intervention. We need some time alone. We need some time with a roof. We need some time without trauma in our minds. Yeah, that part. Which is why talking about the cult of the Karens and the abolishing of PoLice when you're not talking about the implementing of land liberation doesn't make any sense at all. And in so many cases of so-called well checks, it is the reason that we, as poor, disabled, and POC peoples, end up dead. Being escalated, black, and a poverty scholar like our beautiful trans sister Kayla Moore, who was living in low-income housing as a formerly houseless, disabled poverty scholar in Hippocrates, Berkeley. She was perceived as violent because she was having a mental health crisis on a well check. Why? Because of the structurally racist, ableist, and classist gaze of the PoLice. Similarly, Luis Dimitru, Gongara Pat, as an indigenous houseless man, was considered violent just because he was houseless and brown and doing what he always did in a white, middle-class, gentrifucked, not really ever public space. In our work manifesting the Elephant Council, which is the way Poor Magazine has made sure to stay PoLice, courts, and state-mandated reporter-free for the last 22 years. We've had literally dozens of encounters with ourselves in our multi-generational villages of folks living newly inside after years of being outside, and so many still outside, that include actual violence, escalations, extreme depression, threats to children, elders, and adults. But the Elephant Council, as we teach on in How to Not Call PoLice Ever workshops and People School, has always dealt with these multitude of crisis interactions with our poverty scholarship-informed ways and have managed to take care of escalations, violence, and trauma, which as poor and colonized people, we sadly perpetrate often on each other and our children and elders. So I'm so excited by the MH response group that is born out of Anti-Police Terror Project Revolutionaries and the community response team being planned for Seattle and other parts of this occupied Turtle Island. But in all of these cases, I hope that poverty scholarship specifically is sought out. Rather than just a flip to the social work industry, or what I call anti-social workers and case manglers. Yeah, which is never Poverty Scholarship informed. You see, the anti-social work industry, which we teach on at People School, is bred from the white heteropatriarchal theory. And our lives as poor and houseless and traumatized people is rarely, if ever, overstood by anti-social workers or even conscious middle-class caregivers. And so, PoLice or not, our bodies, lives, and children and families are always at risk of separation, misdiagnosis, and increased trauma without a deeper grasp of poverty scholarship, which, as we always say, for us poor people, theory is our life. Thank you for listening to this day's podcast for a poverty scholar, and know that People School's next degentrification and decolonization seminar, where we teach on this, will be on Zoom, offered all across Mama Earth, Black August 29th and 30th. Or you can get a copy of Poverty Scholarship, Poor People-Led Theory, Art, Words, and Tears across Mama Earth on poorpress.net, or call this poverty scholar degentrifucker into your classroom, encampment, or street corner at poormag@gmail.com.
It's been a long old troublesome road, and I'm looking for somebody coming